Our first reading this morning is from a document called Partnership Principles from the United Church of Canada. And I'm going to add a little proviso here. It says, please note that words like God and Christ will be used in this document. Interpret these as you wish. Agree or disagree as much as you like. Partnership. Partnership describes sharing and exchanging resources, ideas, and peoples. Global partnerships are how we live out right relationships. Relationships that reflect Christ's character of justice and love, based on respect, equality, trust, sharing, and transparency. We work together with partners in the midst of oppression, poverty, and conflict for deep changes that will create just economic systems and a world transformed by love. The Partners in Mission Unit facilitates the formal relationships that enable the United Church and global partners to work together. This work of courage and faith in the midst of situations that can include oppression, poverty, conflict, and challenges calls us in the United Church to deepen our understanding of and commitment to partnership in all its forms. We are one partner among many, called to receive and to give. The United Church's partnership work is centered in principles that include equality, trust, and mutual respect, and shared commitment to resist all forms of oppression. A second reading is from the document Reviewing Partnership in the Context of Empire from the United Church of Canada. The United Church of Canada has been engaged in global partnership for over 150 years. Significant shifts have happened throughout that history, redirecting both the practice and theology of partnership to allow it to more fully engage the context of its day. Recent articulation of the nature of empire and the call to live faithfully in resistance to its forces, which are so destructive to the world and its peoples, has resulted in the most recent review. Partnership, the review proposes, is grounded in the relational nature of God and calls us into right relationships with one another, with all of creation, and with God. Partnership leads us to form communities of right relationship, committed to resisting the forces of empire. To speak of partnership in this way requires that the whole church, at all levels, be invited into lived experiences of global partnership. What the United Church understands as empire. Empire is the convergence of economic, political, cultural, geographic, and military imperial interests, systems, and networks that seek to dominate political power and economic wealth. It typically forces and facilitates the flow of wealth and power from vulnerable persons, communities, and countries to the more powerful. Empire today crosses all boundaries, strips and reconstructs identities, subverts cultures, subordinates nation-states, and either marginalizes or co-opts religious communities. A shorthand version of this definition could be, empire is comprised of interconnected systems of political and economic domination, often kept in place by violence or the threat of violence, that are global in scope and benefit the few at the expense of the many. The report also stated that empire can be thought of both as a metaphor and as the empirical manifestation of neoliberal economic globalization and its many attendant destructive tendencies and consequences. And finally, a few words from some of our global partner organizations. Quote, in relations with the United Church of Canada, we highlight the attitude of real commitment with all the questions that makes, in relation with the United Church of Canada, we highlight the attitude of real commitment with all the questions that make the construction of another world possible. the attitude of an honest and frank search for forms and methods to develop better mutual relations, the courage to develop a theological reflection on empire. This is from Central Memorial, Martin Luther King in Cuba. The whole theme of sexual diversity is one where the United Church of Canada has an important contribution to share with others. This is from Coina in Brazil. It is imperative that we listen carefully and allow partners to chart their own course. If we are clear about our mission and values, it is seldom that their ideas would run counter to this. Most often, we find ourselves in solidarity and common cause. And this is from the Pacific Peoples Partnership, offered as wisdom for the journey.
For this time of focusing and grounding this morning, I'd invite you to join me in just a moment of reflection and meditation. To begin, I would invite you to take a moment to feel yourself grounded in your seat. Take a moment to make yourself more comfortable in any way you can. You might want to put your feet on the floor and perhaps your hands on your lap in some way to try to make your weight evenly distributed. If you would like to close your eyes or adopt a soft gaze, please do. And don't forget to breathe. Feel rooted in this place. Let your mind drift down to what is below: the floor, the basement, the earth. Arrive in this place. Let us give thanks for this place, the support that all that is below offers to us by holding us, carrying us, letting us rest, opening up to infinite pathways to move. Remaining connected to that which is below, perhaps begin to expand your focus a little. Consider how it is that you got to this place this morning and the place you traveled from. Think back a little to your life, your journey, how it is that you came to this place, came perhaps to Canada, to Ontario, to Scarborough, to this very place at this very time. Let us give thanks for that journey and for all the people and places as well that we may have left behind. Perhaps allow your hands to move a bit to each side, perhaps placing one hand palm up and the other palm down. Perhaps with the palm that is down, connect to that past, your past, and move your fingers a little, tracing your journey to this time, to this place. Perhaps with the palm that is up, open to the future. Create a sense of openness in yourself to the journey that is to come. If you'd like to move your fingers a little, you can imagine all of the paths that are yet possible from this point. Let us give thanks for our paths, for the things that we have learned, people we've met, choices we've made, and also for all the possibilities yet to come. Remaining grounded, perhaps allow your fingers and your hands to travel further, perhaps even allowing your arms to raise a little. Let's bring to mind people and places that are further away, perhaps some that were named this morning that are on your mind and of concern to you. Perhaps they are places you read about in the newspaper, places you heard mentioned this morning, homelands of people you know or your own relatives or ancestors. Stretch your imagination to picture a person in one of those places. What might their concerns be? their fears, or their wildest hopes. As it is that your arms connect your hands to your mind and your heart, what might be the arms, the connecting places between you and that person? How would you characterize that relationship? And also, how might they? What values would you like to flow from you to them? What values or lessons might you imagine that they would want to flow from them back to you? If you moved your arms at all, perhaps now bring them back to your own body, perhaps even placing a hand over your heart. Let's give thanks for ourselves, our places, our lives, our journeys, our world, our valuable but small part in the so much larger story of the earth and the universe beyond. Let us come back to this place, this time, this space, holding within us whatever feelings or thoughts may have come up. As you are ready, you may want to bring back some small movement to your very grounded feet and allow your eyes to open again if they were closed. Welcome back to this time. Thank you. So now I'd like to bring you in video to a place and a time that is very much on my heart, and I know on Kelly's heart a lot of the time as we think about our time in the Philippines. So I'd like to share briefly, if it will work, a video. No video. Okay, well that's okay. We'll show you the video another time. That's no problem. Yeah, unfortunately we had a few little minor glitches this morning. There were going to be pictures this morning too, so I apologize that you're left just with my voice. No videos or pictures this morning, so I apologize for that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and to share with you today. My name, as many of you know, is Sheryl. I was born in the United Church and am one of those, perhaps few, who grew up in this church and have remained with it my whole life, in large part due to its courageous willingness to be changed and to be transformed that I'm going to share with you today. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share a bit about the United Church, which I love so deeply, through the window of some of its global relationships. These global partner relationships are things that Kelly and I have both had the privilege of witnessing firsthand on several occasions. The global partner I would like to share about primarily today is the National Council of Churches of the Philippines, where we were interns in 2012 from January to May. This experience was challenging, but at the same time, it was deeply affirming of the United Church and the way that it engages with these partnerships. And these partnerships are relationships that we all participate in, not just those who get to go directly, but all of us, as people who are members or in some way associated with the United Church, and particularly as people who give to the church through the Mission and Service Fund. So if that's something that any of you contribute to, I'd like to offer thanks on behalf of the National Council of Churches in the Philippines and many of the other partners. As part of the United Church's program of preparation for Ordained Ministry, candidates are required to do an 8-month internship in addition to their Master of Divinity degree at theological school. And for these internships, there is the option to do 4 months of it with a global partner. So what is a global partner, you might ask? The United Church's global partnerships go back a long, long ways. Long prior to the United Church's formation in 1925 as a union of the Presbyterian, Methodist, and Congregationalist churches. In fact, it was the first time in the world that a denomination was formed by churches coming together rather than splitting apart, which is kind of a cool history. The founding churches were part of this global missionary movement. This movement embodied much of what we might think of when we hear the word missionary, primarily white people from Europe and North America, bringing their Christian faith and their particular denominational brand of it to various parts of the world. This history is very difficult and in many ways quite painful. Often local cultures and local religions were overlooked or at worst deemed to be wrong, backwards, or primitive. Missionaries in many cases were part of an alliance of religion, state, and capitalism that brought a whole host of issues, contributing to impoverishment and oppression. Much could be said about these issues and their long-ranging impacts. At the same time, without in any way taking away that or excusing this painful reality, missionaries are said in many cases to have been some of the first to question the whole enterprise of mission and colonialism, and in some cases became deeply interested in the value of many of the cultures and religions they were encountering. As many missionaries founded schools and hospitals in the places where they worked, feelings toward them were complicated in some cases because what they offered was appreciated in some ways by some local peoples. The liberation movements in various parts of the world in the 1960s and 70s cemented this already ongoing shift in missionary activities and ideology, particularly for mainline Protestant churches. As many new countries rejected their colonial oppression and formed their own governments, the number of missionaries decreased steadily, and many churches, like the United Church, reflected deeply and took a step back to examine their practices. Many national churches in former colonies were formed at the same time. In some cases, these new churches ceased or changed their ties with the churches in Europe and North America that may have founded them. This coincided also with theological shifts in churches, such as the United Church, towards embracing religious diversity and religious pluralism, and challenging the notion of Christian superiority. The United Church, as many churches, struggled with the question of how or if to engage globally. And the voices of those who were recipients of mission around the world also varied. Some rejected Christianity altogether and returned to traditional spiritualities and worldviews that in some cases, always existed and maybe had just gone underground for a time. Some continue to embrace Christianity, on the other hand, and in fact are now critical of more progressive churches for ceasing practices of religious conversion and those beliefs in Christian superiority. And others again embraced theologies of liberation, focused on a spirituality of liberation from oppression in this life, and naming evil as some of the impacts of capitalism, environmental degradation, and militarism. So in consultation and collaboration with these varied partners from around the world, the answer has come again and again to the United Church to remain engaged. The liberation theologies that I mentioned of many churches are connected and have remained closely tied to the social justice movement in the United Church that the United Church is very much known for. However, the practicalities of how to engage have varied, but for the most part have focused on block grants given by the United Church to global partner organizations. And these global partners include churches themselves and also church-related social justice organizations. And these block grants are able to be used for whatever needs are deemed most important in that context. This is valuable and actually quite unique as more and more grants become project-specific, meaning that they're often very time-bound. They're focused on program rather than infrastructure and things like staff time. And they're often dictated, the projects are dictated by the funders rather than the recipients' interests or needs. I very much experienced this myself when I was an intern for a United Church global partner in 2008 called People's Action Forum in Zambia. I was always really curious and kind of confused why they had health and sanitation-related projects and actually built school buildings themselves when their intention was to focus on education policy and lobby the government to fulfill the commitments that it had made to provide universal primary education for children. But the response that I received was that it was actually just the reality that to stay afloat as an organization, they needed to get the grants, whatever grants were available, and it was easier to get grants for health projects at that time and for direct service, such as for actually building schools, rather than for the work that they really wanted to do and saw needs for around policy writing and lobbying. And it was also much easier to get funding for children's education rather than adult education, even though they also wanted to be doing work around that. So that was just one example I'll share as just describing how well-meaning funders actually can have a huge impact on what different organizations around the world do. So all this is to say that funds are very important to global relationships because wealth is unequally divided in the world, and much of the wealth in places like Canada comes at the expense of the well-being of peoples and ecologies elsewhere. Sending funds begins to help correct these imbalances and empower people to work in their own context to overcome the issues they know best. But funds are not the only aspect of these relationships that have continued. The United Church has continued to send people back and forth, both from Canada to elsewhere in the world and vice versa. People now, though, are only sent from Canada when it is directly requested by a partner. Sometimes it is because a person with particular expertise is not available in the local area, or that an outside perspective might be desirable for a particular reason. I think one really clear example of this is the United Church's participation in the Ecumenical Accompanier Program in Israel-Palestine, where it's said that people from outside the region, outside observers, are said to be very beneficial to curbing some of the abuses of power that can occur. So those ecumenical accompaniers do things like, just monitoring checkpoints to make sure that, that the people who need to get through for whatever reason, for medical reasons, for instance, are given priority, and that for the most part the security officers are not abusing the power that they have as much as they might if they thought that no one was watching. Often a large component, though, of people from Canada going overseas is when they come home and them teaching Canadians and United Church members about various situations, and so that they can be part in Canada of projects for policy change and to work for global justice. For example, a lot of the United Church's engagement around mining issues is like this, and many global mining companies that are Canadian, it's helpful to have Canadians that have visited those mining sites to be back in Canada doing lobbying. People also come from global partner organizations, and they have been also very helpful for education and advocacy efforts in Canada. Often those partners' reflections on Canadian society and Canadian churches have provided wake-up calls and challenges towards more just and ethical living for Canadians, and have pushed the theology and reflection in the United Church to be even more progressive. A lot of the United Church's work around the concept of empire, which was mentioned in the readings, which is a concept that connects, again, various issues of neocolonialism, such as migration and militarism, capitalism and westernization. It connects those also with earlier examples of empire that we know from history, like that of the Roman Empire. Some of that empire analysis work has come out of these visits. Well, it might have been and might be more comfortable in some ways for the United Church to say, well, since we don't believe in that earlier form of conversion-based missionary work anymore, we just won't engage globally. We'll cease those ties. But that's not what our partners have asked for. And particularly since the earlier mission and colonial engagement contributed to many of the global injustices we continue to see today, continuing to engage and to learn and to be challenged is part of building a better future rather than merely trying to ignore or forget the shame of the past and shame of many of the ongoing global injustices. So all of that is part of the long and complicated history that Kelly and I carried with us as we traveled to the Philippines in 2012. Part of why going to the Philippines and spending time with one of the United Church's global partners there, again, the National Council of Churches of the Philippines, was my first choice for my internship, was that NCCP and the Protestant churches in the Philippines are particularly known for their advocacy work, for their bold witness to the church in the face of much risk and adversity, through government and military repression, and through their theological imagination of a good life that is far different from what capitalism promises. I also wanted to go to the Philippines because of the particular relationship between that country and Canada, where the Philippines has, through policies of labor export, sends millions of workers around the world through arrangements, including one with the Canadian government, as the country deeply relies on money or remittances that are sent home from workers working abroad. But going certainly was not always easy. I knew that we were not going there to do any work, so to speak, but it was still very challenging to curb the desire to want to be useful. NCCP has a strong policy of not having Westerners come to do work for them, out of the belief that all of the expertise needed is present already in Filipinos, and that volunteers from abroad can actually displace workers in a country where jobs are desperately needed. So you might ask, what did we do? Well, we did a lot of learning, both directly about issues and realities in the Philippines, and also indirectly about Canada, about Western culture, and about ourselves. We attended many conferences on issues ranging from mining justice to migration and human rights. We visited political prisoners in prison and learned about their realities and the issues of repression that they face when doing any sort of advocacy work. We participated in a camp-out protest where an indigenous community leader, Jimmy Laguyan, had been killed by paramilitary forces for refusing to sign a document that would have allowed mining in his territory. So the whole community, and this was quite remarkable, moved several hours from their home so this was women and children and men, and the whole community basically moved to literally camp out for months on the lawn of the state legislature and demand an investigation into their leader's killing. We also participated in a fact-finding mission to a community that will be illegally displaced for luxury development without any compensation or consultation of the local community. And we learned about the realities of Filipino workers overseas, some of whom go missing while working, suffer labor rights abuses, experience discrimination, and are even killed by their employers without any consequences. So we also talked a lot about Canada. People had a lot of questions, which at first seemed like just a way to make conversation, but with further reflection seemed more significant. Canada was a place of hope for the future for many of them, either directly for themselves or through relatives working abroad. It was somewhat unsettling to see so many medical colleges with promotional billboards outside saying things like, "Degrees most likely to be recognized in Canada," while knowing about shortages of nurses in the Philippines themselves, as most with nursing training go abroad. And then the reality that so many Filipinos in Canada find that their degrees are not recognized, despite such promises of the medical colleges. It was also unsettling to see so many advertisements to work abroad and to know that these agencies are not altruistic. In some cases, they will buy their workers' plane tickets and arrange work visas, but these often create multi-year debts for the workers, which drastically reduce their wages, the wages that the workers can send home, and that in some cases it ties them to unsafe or unjust employment in wherever they're working. Issues of concern in the Philippines are many and interconnected, and it's sometimes hard to pick apart cause from consequence. The government's current approach to tackling some of the issues, particularly of poverty, are to promote its labor export policy, meaning to actively create agreements with different governments, including Canada's, to create mechanisms for Filipinos to work abroad and presumably to send as much of their earnings home as they can. And this was really interesting to learn that these remittances from abroad currently make up the largest portion of the GDP of the Philippines. Another approach right now is to try to bring in foreign companies for industries like mining and agriculture. There's a lot of plantations of things like pineapple, banana, things like that. Unfortunately, though, the government has created arrangements that give these companies huge tax breaks. There's a very low minimum wage, and because there's no environmental regulation, these companies are able to use very unsustainable practices. And so the impact, unfortunately, has been quite negative. And it also damages small-scale local initiatives like farming and fishing, because a lot of the land is just sold without people even realizing. They might not have even ever needed a title for their land, and all of a sudden their land is perhaps sold to a multinational corporation. And also, even if their direct property is not sold, often the land and water is contaminated from companies that are working nearby. And when people protest and stand up to these injustices, they are often met with impunity. Issues like imprisonment, disappearance, and death are daily realities. It's very risky to stand up for justice, therefore, in this climate. It was eye-opening for us when we learned that many of the people we met used false names out of fear that at one of the mining conferences we attended, it was revealed that there had been undercover security forces pretending to be activists attending this conference as well. And it was just shocking and really eye-opening to experience the fear of the other attendees who then worried about their pictures having been taken and what might happen to them. It was shocking again when we were in the prisons visiting prisoners to learn their stories. Many people had been in prison for years without ever having any charges laid, without any hearings for even sentencing to know how long they will be in jail. After a visit to a prison, we sat down with some of the staff of the National Council of Churches of the Philippines to discuss what we had experienced. And the staff surprisingly shared their gratitude for the United Church of Canada and said that we had remained in deep responsive partnership as many other funders, including other churches in Europe and North America, were scared off when the NCCP became more politicized in the 1990s. And many ceased their support completely or now only give very small amounts of that TIDE project-based aid that I mentioned earlier, often just for natural disaster relief or very basic food supplies, with very onerous requirements for reporting and for documentation. In their large office complex, it was kind of strange to be there NCCP has this really large office in Manila, and they used to have over 200 staff when the global ecumenical community support for them was stronger. But when we were there were only about 20 staff, down from the previous 200, trying to do just as much work in an increasingly desperate situation. It was humbling to receive such gratitude for them about the United Church's support, but it was also uncomfortable, as we were both cognizant that we, as funders in Canada, including the United Church, do prefer to know exactly where our money is going. And the reality with so many church closures in Canada and with declining church membership, there is less money to begin with. It's hard to know and just to be aware that despite the really good work that they're doing, that more cuts to their funds are likely to be coming. But it's hard to talk about this, being from such a rich country, a rich church, where there are disproportionate financial resources, and at the same time, these narratives that I've mentioned of decline and diminishing resources that are all too present as well. It felt hard to receive their gratitude for the United Church's support amidst uncertainty about how the partnership was evolving. It felt hard to know and to trust words like those expressed in partnership in the context of Empire document that was shared, knowing that finances are needed to continue to bring these good sentiments to life. So it is true, I think, that our real work in the Philippines, from the Philippines, is happening now that we're back in Canada. Working with campaigns like Open for Justice that are trying to give people affected by the practices of Canadian mining corporations outside of Canada access to Canadian courts. Also advocating for just reform of policies for temporary foreign workers, particularly those who work in precarious situations such as nannies and caregivers in private homes. ensuring that they are paid a just wage, they have access to health care, and have a path to Canadian citizenship if they should desire it. And part of it, too, is part of our work as well as within the church, to talk about the amazing work of the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, the need that they have for aid that is not tied and allows them as a partner to draw their own priorities and do advocacy, in some cases, as well as in some cases, service provision and disaster relief. I think some of the issues of declining funds comes from not knowing about the United Church's bold and prophetic work in partnerships, and also discomfort with that missionary past that I mentioned earlier and how that fits in. And I certainly understand that discomfort, but the voices of those who received that earlier form of mission resound over and over that they need partners like the United Church, they need solidarity and block grants, and most of all, ongoing relationship. To live out apology for the past is not in disengagement, but in re-engagement, they say. This time, though, putting their voices and realities at the center. In some ways, that feels similar to me to how I feel about the institution of ordained ministry and even the church more broadly. For me, the choice to be ordained was a complicated one. I knew that I wanted to go to theological school and that I believed strongly in what the church can be, and that in many cases the United Church is striving to be. But the history of ordained ministry is very much tied to hierarchy, an educated one delivering wisdom and even judgment on a passive congregation. The service and contribution of one being recognized, while the service of many others in so many ways in their work and parts of life, of their other parts of their life not validated and not recognized and elevated in such a way. And of course, not only are ordination and ministry complex and loaded, but so is the church itself, specifically the diversity of perspectives within it. The picture of the church that many of us hear most widely communicated is the very conservative iteration. Those who deny science, support misogyny and bigotry, naming anyone or any belief not like theirs as wrong or sinful. Being seen as part of that, much less a leader in that, is the last thing I wanted to sign up for. The United Church and progressive activists and even mainline Christianity is not very widely known at all. The history of these churches, including the United Church and the creation of Medicare in Canada, its role in the women's rights movement, the labor rights movements and the formation of unions, the movement towards universal education, and globally in the civil rights movement in the United States, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and liberation movements in Latin America. These histories are much less known, and even lesser known is the way that religion was not inconsequential, and that the church was not merely a vehicle for social organization, I believe. I believe that there's something fundamental about the way that Bible stories provided inspiration and imagination towards a better future, that biblical characters offered solidarity and connection to a longer history. Christian values in some cases provided moral justification, and the rituals of Christian life provided grounding and windows into the way things could be. And Christian seasons provided a rhythm, and so on, to these movements, I believe was quite instrumental. I know all too well, though, that many of these same stories, rituals, and values have and also continue to support and justify oppression. But I do believe that they are powerful and can play a unique role in movements for social change and justice, at the same time honoring that many people work for justice rooted in different religious traditions or in none at all. But for me, at least personally, Christianity provides a frame that challenges me to greater integrity, greater justice, and greater wholeness. In our 24/7 culture, it gives me a place of rest and of activity, for inward reflection and for outward action, seasons of expectation and of lament. For me, it places my life in a larger story and relates me to ancestors who struggled for similar things in the past, and propels me forward with images and tastes of the possibility of justice for all things. The church can be one of those images and experiences of possibility, providing connection not based on what I do, but that I simply am, bringing together diverse peoples across race, class, belief, gender, perspective, and experience. While I love the church, and it has provided such positive experiences of this for me personally, I never had a narrow sense of wanting to serve it in a particular way. I thought after theological school that I might not get ordained because I didn't, and I don't, feel a particular sense of call towards the traditional congregational form of ministry, and I do think that many of the concerns about the structure of ordained ministry that I've mentioned are problematic. But to make a very long story short, I decided to choose a position of engagement with reimagining and recreating this institution. A big part of that for me is the way the United Church as a whole is wrestling with its history and the legacy of things like ordination, and in many ways similar to that, like mission. Seeking apology for past injustices and working toward more equitable and just models of continuing engagement, placing the voices of those who have been most marginalized and affected at the center. When I looked around at my classmates and my mentors and colleagues and saw deeply honest and imaginative ways that they are transforming ideas about ordination and about ministry, I felt like I could be part of that institution and that community. And being accountable to a community is another major aspect of my choice to be ordained. Maybe it's funny to say, but promising to be accountable to the church was one of the most meaningful parts of the promises that I made when I was ordained. Let me explain. I've seen many of the problems and abuses of power that can come from people who work completely outside of structures of accountability. And while there can certainly be frustrations working within a larger institution, a larger community, there can also be good checks and balances, strong support, second and third opinions challenging me to see other perspectives, and to check the alignment of my own values with my actions. I will admit that it's not a completely comfortable decision, nor a total fit, nor was going to the Philippines and being referred to as a missionary by strangers on the street and carrying part of the weight of centuries of mission history and ongoing mission realities for many more conservative churches that just make me cringe. But to see what that relationship meant and means to our partners, like the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, and to be part of living into a mission partnership that they have had the agency to redefine was amazing. The ongoing challenge to my daily life that those relationships bring is overwhelming, but good, and leading me towards a better, more just way of living. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for you, for the ways that you, as West Hill, are reimagining institutions and practices, keeping justice and integrity as your guiding compass and firmly rooted core. On behalf of the National Council of Churches of the Philippines, I would like to say thank you for your support. Thank you for your solidarity, supporting their risky witness for justice and imagination of a better Philippines and a better world for us all. Thank you.